The smell came up the ridge first. Sorghum boiling down in a pot, hot cornmeal under it, wood smoke drifting sideways on a Sunday afternoon above Hell for Certain Creek in Leslie County, Kentucky. That was Ella Mae Sizemore cooking. 58 in 1968, mother of 7, grandmother of 19, and she had not bought white sugar in 4 years. She sweetened everything out of a gallon of sorghum at 40 cents a quart from a neighbor's mule-powered press, one blackened Dutch oven, no thermometer, and still a 6-layer wedding cake held together with apple butter and patience. What these families ate as sweets will startle a modern pantry. This list is a record of 25 real desserts Hillbilly families made between 1890 and 1975 in eastern Kentucky, West Virginia, East Tennessee, and the North Georgia mountains. Some beautiful, some strange. The part that surprised me most is how much joy fits inside almost nothing. Number 25. Number 25, dried apple stack cake. A woman in Perry County, Kentucky, would start this cake in the middle of September, the same week her apples came off the trees. She peeled the fruit, quartered it, threaded it on cotton string, and hung the string from the rafters of her back porch for 3 weeks until the pieces rattled like old leather. That is how she kept the taste of September alive all the way to Christmas. The cake itself was 6 thin layers, sometimes 7, each one more biscuit than cake. Flour, sorghum molasses, buttermilk, lard, 1 egg. She baked them in a cast iron skillet, one at a time, because she only owned the one skillet. Between each layer, she spread a dark, spiced paste of those dried apples, cooked down with water and a little sugar if she had it. The cake had to sit for 3 days before anybody was allowed to cut it. You do not rush a stacked cake, you wait for it. The folklore says a bride was counted popular by how many layers her neighbors brought, each woman walking up the path with a single thin round wrapped in a dish towel. Ella Mae's daughter had 11 layers at her wedding. Ella Mae cried for an hour. Number 24, sorghum molasses cookies. You have to understand something about sorghum to understand why these cookies existed. Sorghum is not molasses. Sorghum is the juice pressed out of a tall cane-like grass, boiled down in a flat pan over a wood fire until it turns the color of dark honey and tastes like a field at dusk. A gallon of it in 1962 cost $1.50 from the neighbor up the road who owned the mule and the press. A gallon of white sugar cost 4 times that at the store in town, and town was a 2-hour drive. So you used what you had. Mrs. Arlie Burgess in Clay County, West Virginia, made a tin full of sorghum cookies every Saturday for 51 years. Flour, lard, sorghum, soda, ginger, a pinch of salt. She rolled them thin as a dime and baked them on the stove. The children got 2 each after supper. But her grandchildren, grown now, still say they have never tasted anything sweeter. That is not an exaggeration. That is memory doing what memory does. Number 23, vinegar pie. Now here is one that will make a modern kitchen flinch. A cup of sugar, 3 tablespoons of flour, 2 eggs, a half cup of white vinegar, water, a pat of butter, 1 crust. That is the whole recipe. No fruit, no cream, no nuts. Just vinegar, cooked until it turns, somehow, into a pale gold custard that tastes a little like lemon pie and a little like nothing you have eaten before. It was a February pie. It was a winter pie. It was a pie you made in the second week of a long month when the fruit cellar was down to the last 3 jars of apple butter and you still wanted to put something sweet on the table for a cold Sunday supper. Women in the hollows of McDowell County, West Virginia, had this recipe memorized. They had to. They made it most weeks of January and February for the best part of a century. It fed 8 people for 9 cents. Number 22, sugar on cornbread with sweet milk. This was not a company dessert. This was what a child got when a child was loved and there was nothing else. A wedge of hot cornbread broken into a thick china bowl, a teaspoon of white sugar if it was a holiday, a drizzle of sorghum if it was not, a pour of warm cow's milk over the top from the family cow, still faintly tasting of grass. The child ate it with a big spoon, sitting on a kitchen chair that was too tall, legs swinging. In Knott County, Kentucky, This was called cornbread and sweet milk. In Letcher County, they called it crumblings. In parts of West Virginia, they called it cornbread soaky. The name depended on the ridge. The feeling was the same. You do not forget the first time someone hands you something warm and sweet and tells you it is all for you. Number 21, blackberry jam cake with caramel icing. The blackberries came from the fence line at the back of the tobacco patch. Every July, a grandmother would send 5 or 6 children out with lard buckets tied around their waists with baler twine and tell them not to come back until every bucket had a dark, heavy bottom. She spent the next 2 weeks making jam. A quart jar held about 14 cents worth of sugar and a summer's worth of work. That jam went into the cake at Christmas. 3 layers, spiced with cinnamon, allspice, and clove, buttermilk for tang, a full pint of blackberry jam folded into the batter. Over it all, a sheet of caramel icing poured hot so it set into a thin sugar shell you had to crack with the side of your fork. Every serious Kentucky grandmother had a jam cake recipe and she did not share it. Not in writing. Not even with her own daughters, some of them, until the day she knew she was dying. Number 20, peanut butter potato candy. Here is a candy that began as 2 ingredients and stayed that way for 80 years. 1 cold, boiled potato, 2 cups of powdered sugar worked in by hand until a white dough came together under your palms. You rolled it out thin on a floured board, spread peanut butter over the whole sheet, rolled it up like a jelly roll, cut it into coins, pinwheels of brown and white, sweet enough to set your teeth aching. A single potato, a 2-pound bag of sugar from the company store, and a jar of peanut butter made enough candy for a church social of 50. Mrs. Nora Lewis of Mingo County, West Virginia, made it every Christmas Eve from 1944 until 1989. Her grandchildren still fight over the recipe card. 4 lines long. One of them has it framed. Number 19, fried hand pies with dried apples, not baked, not oven puffed. Fried, in a black skillet, in an inch of bacon grease. Half moons of biscuit dough folded over a spoonful of those same dried apples from the porch rafters, stewed down with a little cinnamon and whatever sweetener was in the jug. The crimped edge was sealed with fork tines. The pies went into the hot grease for 2 minutes aside and came out dark gold, blistered, hissing. On Sunday afternoons in the coal camps outside Harlan, a miner's wife would make 2 dozen of them at once, wrap them in a clean flour sack dish towel, and a man carried 6 of them down into the mine the next morning in a tin lunch bucket. They were still warm at breakfast. That was the trick of the hand pie. It traveled. Number 18, chess pie. Chess pie is what you make when you have almost nothing. A stick of butter, a cup of sugar, 2 eggs, a tablespoon of cornmeal, a teaspoon of vinegar, a splash of vanilla if you had vanilla. A pie crust, because you could always manage a pie crust out of flour and lard. That is the whole architecture. It bakes into a gold, cracked top over a layer of something between pudding and candy. It is rich in the way a poor family's dessert is rich, which is to say, with the last of what was on the shelf, used well. The Appalachian grandmothers who served chess pie at funeral dinners knew a quiet thing. A simple pie made from pantry scrapings says to a grieving family what a fancy cake cannot. It says, "I had you in mind. I stood in my kitchen and I thought of you." Number 17, buttermilk pie. Buttermilk was not wasted in a hillbilly kitchen. Not ever. What was left after the butter came out of the churn went into biscuits, into pancakes, into the dog's bowl on a hot afternoon, and once or twice a month, into a pie. A cup and a half of buttermilk, a cup and a half of sugar, 3 eggs, a stick of butter, flour, lemon if a neighbor down the road had brought one up from Tennessee. The custard set creamy and tangy with a thin, crackled sugar skin on top. A farm wife in Owsley County named it a desperation pie because she made it in the weeks before the first peach came ripe. Her children called it the best pie she made, but she never believed them. Number 16, persimmon pudding. Wild persimmons are not friendly fruit. Bite into one before the first hard frost and your mouth will turn inside out. But wait for the frost. Gather the soft orange fruit off the ground under the tree. Push the pulp through a colander to get the seeds out, and suddenly you have a sweet, dark, honey-flavored mash that tastes like the woods in October. The grandmother in Wise County, Virginia, stirred the pulp into a batter of flour, sorghum, buttermilk, an egg, and a spoon of soda. She baked the pudding in a sheet pan over a slow fire for 90 minutes. It came out dense, dark brown, slightly spongy. Cut into squares, eaten warm with a pat of butter melting into the top. A pudding made of a fruit that grew for free on a fence line. 30 cents worth of flour. Nothing else needed buying. Number 15. Coffee soup over crumbled biscuit. Here is the part of the list where some of you are about to think I am making it up. I am not. Coffee soup was a real dessert, eaten in real kitchens across the southern mountains for 3 generations, and for many older Appalachian people, it is still the taste that means home. A cold leftover biscuit, a bowl, a pour of hot coffee, thinned with warm milk from the cow, sweetened with a heaped teaspoon of sugar or a thick drizzle of sorghum. A grown man ate it at the end of the evening meal. A child was given a small cup of it before bed on a cold winter night. Here is what I want you to see, and this is the thing most modern people miss. Coffee soup was not a joke, and it was not a hardship trick. It was a comfort. A bitter grown-up drink, softened with milk and sugar, poured over the last piece of something their mother had baked that morning. An old man in Letcher County, interviewed for a Foxfire oral history in 1977, said he ate coffee soup 4 times a week for 60 years. He never once thought of it as poor. He thought of it as his. These small, strange desserts were the taste of a specific life. They were not reminders that a family had little. They were reminders that a family had each other at a table, at the end of a hard day, with a warm cup and a piece of bread. That is the whole sermon of hillbilly sweet making, and you will find it under every item on this list if you look close enough. Number 14. Hickory nut cake. The hickory tree is a stingy tree. The nuts are small, the shell is thick, the meat inside is the size of a baby's fingernail. To fill a single cup, you sit on a porch in November with a hammer and a flat rock, and you work for an hour. A grandmother in Watauga County, North Carolina, put her grandchildren to the job every fall. Each child got a penny a cup. It took a whole Saturday to earn a nickel. The cake was worth it. 2 layers, butter, sugar, milk, eggs, flour, and 2 cups of hickory meat stirred through the batter at the very end. A boiled white icing over the top. The flavor is delicate, slightly smoky, nothing like a pecan. There are fewer than a dozen places in America where you can still buy a slice of real hickory nut cake. Most of them are within 80 miles of the ridge where Ella May was born. Number 13. Corncob jelly on a cold biscuit. Here is another one that will surprise you. After supper in September, a hillbilly woman did not throw her corn cobs to the hogs. Not yet. She boiled 6 cobs in a pot of water for a full hour, strained out a pale amber liquid that smelled faintly of corn silk, added sugar and a box of powdered pectin, and poured it into jelly jars. Corn cob jelly, mock honey. Poor woman's gold. It tasted, people said, very close to real honey, though honey was $3 a jar at the store and corncob jelly cost nothing but time. Spread thick on a cold split biscuit, warmed briefly on the stovetop, it was a real dessert at breakfast. A family in Pike County, Kentucky, put up 40 pints of corncob jelly every fall in 1953. They ate the last jar in May. Not one of the 8 children ever knew they were eating cobs. Number 12. Sour cream raisin pie. This pie is what you made in February, after the cow had calved and the milk was coming rich, and you had a crock of cultured sour cream on the cold shelf of the spring house. A cup of that sour cream, a cup of sugar, 2 beaten egg yolks, a heaped cup of dark raisins, a scraping of nutmeg, a crust underneath, a pale meringue piled on top made from the 2 whites. Baked slow. The raisins plumped. The custard thickened. The meringue took a soft tan on its peaks. A woman in Breathitt County, Kentucky, wrote in her kitchen book in 1961 that this pie was worth the reputation her mother-in-law never gave her. Hillbilly women kept score in pies. The good ones knew. Number 11. Shoofly pie. The Shoofly pie crossed into Appalachia from the Pennsylvania Dutch country along the old Route 219, carried down the spine of the mountains by traveling peddlers and German-speaking settlers looking for farmland. By the 1920s, it had quietly become a staple in parts of Preston and Randolph counties in West Virginia. A cup of molasses, a cup of boiling water, a teaspoon of soda, a cup of flour crumbled with butter and brown sugar into sandy crumbs. The molasses went into the unbaked crust. The crumbs went over the top. It baked into a dark, sticky, cake-crumbed wonder of a pie. The name came from the habit of setting the pies out to cool on a porch rail, where flies had to be shooed off the sugar. A whole pie, in 1931, cost a dime to make. It fed a family of 7 with seconds. Number 10. Divinity with black walnuts. Here is a candy that belongs to Christmas. 2 cups of sugar, a half cup of corn syrup, a half cup of water, cooked to hardball stage, then beaten into 2 stiff egg whites until it turned white as a church dress. At the last moment, a cup of chopped black walnuts gathered from the yard in October was folded in. The grandmother dropped it onto waxed paper by the teaspoon. 24 small, snowy mounds. It sat on a saucer on the sideboard from Christmas Eve until New Year's. A divinity that failed because the weather was damp or the beating was off was a minor family tragedy. Hillbilly grandmothers from Pickett County, Tennessee to Braxton County, West Virginia, swore you could not make a good divinity on a rainy day. They were not superstitious, but they were right. The sugar refused to set. Number 9. Seafoam candy. Seafoam is Divinity's sister, and the only real difference is the sugar. Brown sugar, not white. A cup of brown sugar, half a cup of corn syrup, a quarter cup of water, cooked hot, beaten into 1 egg white, dropped by spoonfuls. It comes out a soft caramel tan with a crackly outside and a melting, airy inside. The children got 1 each on Christmas morning. A grandmother in Fentress County, Tennessee, kept her seafoam in a round tin lined with waxed paper and gave a piece to every child who knocked on the door between Christmas and Twelfth night. In a hollow where cash money was short, that tin was one of the richest things in the house. Number 8. Pull taffy. This was not a candy. This was an evening. A big family with no radio and no visitors on a cold January night would cook a pan of sorghum and sugar to the soft ball stage, pour it out onto a buttered marble slab, let it cool just enough to handle, and then pair off, greased hands to greased hands, and pull. 2 people at a time stretching the hot, soft candy across the kitchen between them, folding, stretching again, until the dark brown of the sorghum turned pale gold, almost cream. An hour of pulling, an hour of laughing. The taffy was cut into squares with kitchen shears, wrapped in twists of waxed paper, handed out to the cousins. A taffy pull was how a family in Letcher County spent an entire Saturday night in 1949 without spending a nickel. Half the courtships in that hollow started over a pan of taffy. Number 7. Gingerbread with sorghum. Not the spiced cookie kind, the pan kind. Hot out of the oven, a deep dark square of cake the color of river mud, smelling of ginger and clove and cinnamon and wood smoke from the stove. A cup of sorghum, a half cup of lard, a cup of buttermilk, 2 eggs, 3 cups of flour, a tablespoon of ground ginger, a good pinch of soda. Baked 40 minutes in a greased iron pan. The gingerbread at Ella Mae's kitchen came out at 4 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon, cut in thick squares, laid out with a pat of butter melting into the top and a pour of whatever cream was on hand. A Sunday dessert that cost 17 cents to make in 1968 and fed every grandchild who ran up the hill looking for her. Number 6. Dandelion jelly on hot cornbread. Early spring, before the creek cresses came in, a mother and 3 daughters walked the upper pasture with flour sack aprons held out and picked dandelion heads for 2 hours. They wanted only the yellow petals, not the green. Home at the kitchen table, the 4 of them pinched the yellow out of every single flower until they had a pile the size of a cereal bowl. The petals boiled in water, strained through cheesecloth, became a pale gold tea. Sugar and pectin turned the tea into a clear, honey-colored jelly that tasted faintly of spring itself. A jar of it on a split of hot cornbread was a thin, odd, beautiful dessert. It cost absolutely nothing but a morning of 4 people walking a field together. That, in a hillbilly economy, was not nothing. That was wealth of a different kind. Number 5. Cracklin cake with molasses glaze. Here is the dessert that will stop a modern stomach cold. On hog killing day in November, the fat was rendered down to lard in a huge iron kettle. The crispy, browned bits left behind in the bottom of the kettle were the cracklins. Salty, pork sweet, crunchy. You would expect a cracklin to end up on a piece of cornbread at supper, and usually it did. But in a handful of Clay and Leslie County kitchens, something stranger happened on the same day. The housewife took a cup of those cracklins, chopped them fine, folded them into a sweet batter of flour, sorghum, buttermilk, and a little sugar, and baked a cake. A dense, slightly salty, deeply rich cake, glazed while hot with a dark molasses pour. A bite of it is savory and sweet at the same time, like maple bacon before maple bacon was a city food. Now I want to pause on this one, because it says something about the whole list. These desserts were shocking to us, but they were not shocking to the people who ate them. Sugar was cash money. Sorghum was subsistence. Lard was in the kettle because the hog had to be killed before the cold ran out. A cracklin cake on a November evening was not a grotesque choice. It was the only choice a careful mother could make. Every pound of pork fat that went into a cake was a pound she did not have to buy back from the store. A child who ate a slice of cracklin cake was eating the same animal whose smoked hams were hanging in the smokehouse, and the same sorghum his father had pressed the week before, and the same flour his mother had traded eggs for at the Crossroads store. It was a dessert in which no part of a life was wasted. That is the architecture of a hillbilly sweet. Nothing out, nothing thrown. Everything used and used up and turned into something a child would remember for the rest of her life. Number 4. Lard biscuit dipped in sorghum. A cold, hard, day-old biscuit. A bowl with 2 fingers of sorghum molasses in the bottom. A spoonful of fresh rendered lard, soft, almost white, spread thick on top of the biscuit. The biscuit went sorghum side down into the bowl. You ate it with your hands. The lard gave it a buttery richness a poor family could not afford from a cow. But the sorghum did what sugar would have done if there had been sugar. This was a Monday dessert, a Tuesday dessert, a Wednesday after school dessert. Any weekday a child walked in hungry between dinner and supper. This was what she was handed, without ceremony, without apology. There are still people alive in Harlan County who would pay you to bring them one. Number 3. Pecan pie made with Caro syrup. The Caro Corn Syrup Company published the first printed pecan pie recipe on the back of a bottle around 1930. Within 10 years, that recipe had walked up every dirt road in Appalachia and settled in. A cup of Caro, a cup of sugar, 3 eggs, a stick of butter, a teaspoon of vanilla, a heap of pecans, a crust. That was it. A pecan pie of real indulgent richness, made from a bottle of cheap corn syrup bought at the Crossroads store for 45 cents. By the 1950s, it was the pie a Kentucky mother carried to a church social, the pie she made for a returning son, the pie on the sideboard at Thanksgiving. Here is the thing most people miss. The pecan pie is not an ancient mountain recipe. It is an industrial product the poor repurposed into a family heirloom. That happened all the time, and the pecan pie is the proof. Number 2. Sweet potato pie. The sweet potato was a hillbilly insurance policy. It kept in a cool cellar for the whole winter. It grew in poor soil on a hillside nobody else wanted. A woman with a row of sweet potatoes was a woman who would not go without dessert from October to March. A pie was the obvious use. 2 cups of cooked mashed sweet potato, a cup of sugar or a half cup of sorghum, 2 eggs, half a cup of evaporated milk from a little can, a scraping of nutmeg, a pinch of salt, a good crust, baked until the top cracked in a dozen thin lines. A slice of it, eaten warm on a Sunday evening in January, with a cup of black coffee and a fire popping in the next room, was the whole argument against the word poor. A family with sweet potato pie on the table was not poor. A family with sweet potato pie on the table was at home. Number 1. Sorghum stack cake with apple butter. And here, at number 1, we come back to Ella May. This was the cake she made every Christmas Eve of her adult life, the last time being Christmas Eve of 1983, 2 years before she died in the same cabin where her mother had died. 6 thin layers, each baked one at a time in that blackened Dutch oven, each brushed with sorghum while still warm. Between the layers, she spread a thick, spiced apple butter she had cooked down in a copper kettle over an outdoor fire in October, stirring it for 9 hours with a wooden paddle. The whole cake sat under a tea towel on the sideboard for 3 days before Christmas dinner. On Christmas afternoon, a grandchild was given the honor of carrying it to the table. A slice was dark brown, 6 stripes of cake, 6 stripes of almost black apple butter, a piece of the year compressed. The grown-ups cried. The children ate too much. Nobody spoke until the second piece was cut. A sorghum stack cake is not a recipe. It is a calendar. It is September and October and November and December on one plate. It is the reason a family that had almost no money ever felt, on a Sunday afternoon in 1968, rich. This is the part of the list I want you to sit with for a minute because the stack cake is why these desserts vanished. A cake that takes 3 months to assemble cannot survive the supermarket. By 1978, a grocery store in Hyden, Kentucky, was selling sheet cakes for $4.29. By 1985, a daughter who grew up with Ella May's stack cake was embarrassed to carry one to a church social because somebody would say the icing looked homemade. By 1995, the sorghum press up the road had sold its mule. But the cake did not die because it was bad. The cake died because high-fructose corn syrup and plastic wrap and 100 bakery aisles told a generation their mother's work was old-fashioned. There is grief in that. Real grief, the way a language dies. A hillbilly dessert is not a quaint thing. It is the handwriting of a whole people, written in sorghum and flour and hands that hurt from the grinding wheel. Chocolate cherry wreaths were edible ornaments of love and cheer. Drop cookies shaped into small rings, they shimmered with candied cherries pressed on top. Their deep cocoa flavor mixed beautifully with the jeweled sweetness of fruit. On baking sheets lined with parchment, they looked like tiny garlands ready for celebration. The smell of chocolate filled the air, wrapping the house in comfort. These cookies were made for sharing, wrapped in ribbon, placed on trays, given with a smile. They brought color to every cookie swap and warmth to every home. Biting into one felt like biting into December itself, rich, festive, full of heart. Chocolate cherry wreaths were proof that beauty did not need to be grand, only made with care. Their glossy tops and soft centers made them a favorite that deserved to return to modern kitchens. She always started the crust the night before, crushed pecans pressed into flour and butter, baked until barely golden, cooled completely before anything touched it. In the morning came the cream cheese layer, beaten smooth with powdered sugar and folded into Cool Whip until it held its shape. Then the lemon pudding layer, spread cold and level with a spatula. Then another cloud of Cool Whip on top. 4 hours in the refrigerator, sometimes overnight, and it came out cold and sliceable in clean squares. Lemon Lush had been around since the 1960s, but the convenience of the 1970s, instant pudding, tubs of Cool Whip, cream cheese at every grocery, turned it into a potluck staple from Ohio to Georgia. It was the dessert people asked her to bring. She brought it every time without being asked. After she was gone, nobody could remember exactly how thin she made the cream cheese layer or why it always tasted cooler than everyone else's. The pineapple upside-down cake, a staple of American baking since the early 20th century, experienced a notable resurgence in the 1980s. Characterized by its caramelized pineapple and cherry topping, the cake's preparation begins with a layer of sliced pineapples and cherries at the bottom of the pan, covered by a rich batter that, once baked and inverted, reveals a colorful and enticing design. The availability of canned pineapples and the affordability of baking ingredients during the 1980s contributed to the cake's popularity. Innovations in non-stick bakeware during the 1980s also facilitated the cake's preparation, ensuring that the aesthetic appeal of the caramelized top was preserved upon inversion. The pineapple upside-down cake not only served as a delicious treat, but also as a canvas for culinary creativity. with many bakers experimenting with different types of fruit and spices to create unique variations of the classic recipe. Candy cane fudge bars brought holiday sparkle to every table. Chocolate fudge, soft and glossy, was spread thick in pans before being topped with crushed peppermint sticks. The colors, deep brown and bright red, looked like Christmas captured in candy. Each bite was a dance of cool mint and rich cocoa, bold yet balanced. Children helped press the candies on top, their fingers sticky with chocolate and joy. Mothers wrapped pieces in wax paper and tucked them into tins bound for neighbors and friends. The bars snapped cleanly, each one shining with little shards of peppermint glass. They were a gift that spoke of cheer and warmth without needing a card. In an era when everything was homemade and heart-driven, candy cane fudge bars stood out as both festive and effortless. They brought smiles to faces and sweetness to cold winter nights. One bite and the holidays felt close again. Simple, sincere, and sparkling. When the Rolling Stones toured America in 1972, the tequila sunrise was the drink on the rider, and by the following summer, every bar from Los Angeles to Atlanta was mixing one. The cocktail, tequila, orange juice, grenadine sinking slowly through the glass to pool at the bottom like a sunset, was too photogenic to stay a drink. Home bakers poured it into a bundt pan. Yellow cake mix went in with orange juice and a generous measure of tequila. Then grenadine was layered into the batter at the last moment so it would streak the crumb red and orange as it baked. The glaze on top was more orange juice and more tequila, poured on while the cake was still warm so it soaked straight through. At a 1973 dinner party, arriving with a tequila sunrise cake on a pedestal plate meant you had seen the concert, or at least knew someone who had. The cocktail aged out of fashion before the decade ended. The cake was never sophisticated enough to outlast it. The 7-layer cake, or rainbow cake, impresses with its vibrant, multicolored appearance. Each of the 7 thin sponge layers dyed a different color and separated by a thin layer of chocolate or jam. Originating from Europe, this cake became popular in American bakeries, especially within Eastern European immigrant communities. The cake's preparation is meticulous, involving the precise measurement and coloring of batter for each layer, followed by careful baking to ensure each layer remains uniformly thin and moist. The 1980s saw advancements in food dye quality, which offered brighter, more fade-resistant colors, making the layers visually striking without affecting the flavor. The fillings between the layers also evolved during this time, with variations including apricot, raspberry, and even mint jams becoming popular. Banana Cream Delight lived up to its name, every spoonful light, cool, and layered with love. It started with sliced bananas nestled into creamy vanilla pudding stacked between graham crackers or vanilla wafers, then crowned with whipped topping. As it chilled overnight, the flavors melded into something soft and silky, not too sweet but just right. This was the kind of dessert that came out after the main meal, carried proudly in glass casseroles and greeted with smiles. The first scoop was always the hardest, cutting through the neat layers to reveal the golden pudding beneath. Families made it for potlucks, birthdays, and especially holidays when ovens were already too full. In the 1970s, it represented everything good about home kitchens: resourceful, reliable, and always made to share. The bananas browned just a little, but no one minded. It was the taste that mattered, not the perfection. Every bite tasted like memory, soft as a lullaby, and rich as the laughter it was served with. Banana Cream Delight wasn't just a dessert, it was a promise that even the simplest ingredients could create something unforgettable. Ella Rita Helfrich of Houston, Texas, took second place at the 1966 Pillsbury Bake-Off with a chocolate bundt cake that did something nobody could explain. Butter, sugar, eggs, flour, walnuts, and a packet of Jiffy Double Dutch fudge frosting mix went into the batter, and when it came out of the oven, the outside had set into a brownie dark crust while the center remained soft and fudgy, a tunnel of chocolate running through the entire ring. No filling was added. It formed itself. The nuts were structural. Without them, the tunnel collapsed. Pillsbury received so many requests that the recipe may have done more to popularize the Nordic ware bundt pan than any other single dish of the 1970s. By the 1990s, Pillsbury discontinued the frosting mix the recipe required. Home bakers spent years trying to replicate it with cocoa powder and powdered sugar. Some got close. The woman who invented it passed on long before the frosting mix did. Angel food cake, a staple in American baking, is known for its distinctive light, fluffy texture attributed to its unique ingredient list that includes no fat, only egg whites, sugar, flour, and cream of tartar. This cake's origins trace back to the United States in the late 19th century, gaining popularity as a food of the angels due to its airy lightness. By the 1980s, it became synonymous with health-conscious dessert choices because of its low-fat content. Innovations in baking technology, particularly the widespread availability of electric mixers, made the process of whipping egg whites less daunting, contributing to its popularity. Interestingly, the cake's simple base became a canvas for a variety of flavor additions, from almond extract to citrus zests, allowing it to adapt to various taste preferences over the decades. Caramel apple trifle turned the season's best flavors into a showpiece. Cubes of buttery pound cake were layered with spiced apples, caramel pudding, and whipped cream. Each layer glistened in clear glass bowls, a celebration of color and comfort. It was elegant enough for dinner parties, yet simple enough for home kitchens. The smell alone, cinnamon, brown sugar, butter, drew everyone closer. Every bite was soft and rich, the sweetness deepened by a hint of tart fruit. Families made it for Thanksgiving, Christmas, and every occasion in between. In a decade known for convenience, this dessert managed to feel special without being complicated. It captured the heart of 1970s gatherings, where beauty met practicality and tradition met innovation. Caramel apple trifle reminded everyone that celebration did not need excess, only intention. Served chilled, it tasted like the warmth of a family gathered together, layered, imperfect, and endlessly good. The fondue pot lived in a cabinet between dinner parties, still in its original box, and bringing it out was a declaration that the evening was an event. The chocolate fondue itself was straightforward: semi-sweet chocolate, heavy cream, a splash of Kirsch or Grand Marnier, melted over a small flame until smooth enough to coat a strawberry cleanly. The social mechanics were the real technique. Everyone dipped in turns. The long, two-tined fork with the colored ring that marked which was yours, the strawberries and pound cake cubes arranged on the serving platter, the rule that dropping your dipper meant a kiss or a drink depending on the company. Swiss-French communal tradition, revived in America in the 1950s, reached peak saturation in American dinner culture through the 1970s, before fondue pots disappeared into thrift stores by the thousands. The chocolate still works exactly the same way. It is the gathering around it that cannot be replicated. Millionaire pie, known for its rich, creamy filling that typically includes pineapple, maraschino cherries, pecans, and sweetened condensed milk in a graham cracker or pastry crust, is a no-bake dessert that likely originated in the southern United States. The pie's filling is usually mixed together and chilled in the refrigerator until set, making it an ideal recipe for quick preparation without the need for an oven. During this time, variations began to include the use of whipped cream or cream cheese to enhance the texture and flavor of the filling, offering a more decadent and smooth consistency. The addition of coconut or different types of nuts was also a popular variation that provided an interesting texture contrast to the creamy filling. Holiday pecan tassies were the jewels of every dessert table. Tiny, golden, and delicate, they looked like miniature pies kissed by sugar and tradition. The crusts were pressed into muffin tins by hand, filled with a glossy mixture of butter, brown sugar, and pecans that baked into caramel perfection. They cooled on wire racks, their fragrance filling kitchens with warmth that felt like December itself. Women brought them to bake sales, church suppers, and cookie swaps, where they disappeared before anyone could count how many they'd made. Each one held a perfect balance of crisp and chewy, rich enough to taste like indulgence, small enough to justify another. The tassies were made from the heart by hands that measured without spoons and baked with instinct. They represented the kind of craftsmanship that modern kitchens rarely see. The art of patience. For many, they were more than treats. They were holiday currency, traded and gifted with pride. Today, their memory lingers as a symbol of care, reminding us that sometimes the smallest desserts carry the biggest joy. The recipe lived in church cookbooks and was never on the back of any package, which meant you had to know someone. Chocolate chips and butter melted over low heat until smooth, then pulled from the burner and cooled for 10 full minutes, not 5, because pouring hot chocolate over the marshmallows too soon turned the batch into one solid, shapeless mass with no visible structure at all. Pastel mini marshmallows went in, then chopped walnuts. Everything stirred carefully until every piece was coated. She shook sweetened coconut flakes across a long sheet of waxed paper, spooned half the mixture down the center, and rolled it into a log with her hands, pressing gently to compact the shape. 2 logs wrapped tight. Refrigerator overnight without fail. In the morning, she sliced them on a diagonal with a sharp knife, and each cross-section showed a stained glass pattern. Pastel circles of marshmallow suspended in dark chocolate, ringed in white coconut. At Christmas, the cut faces looked exactly like the windows of the church she had attended since childhood. Nobody in the next generation ever thought to ask for the recipe card. The refrigerator cake, known for its no-bake convenience, consists of layers of crispy cookies softened by whipped cream or pudding to form a cohesive, cake-like texture. The 1980s brought innovation to this classic with the introduction of flavored whipped creams and diverse cookie varieties, transforming the traditional vanilla or chocolate profiles into more exotic flavors. The typical assembly involves a strategic layering of cookies alternated with generous amounts of cream, which is then left to set in the refrigerator until the cookies absorb moisture and meld together. During this period, advancements in refrigeration technology allowed for better temperature control, ensuring that the cakes set perfectly and maintained their structure when sliced. Golden butterscotch pudding cake glowed like sunlight on a winter morning. When baked, it formed its own sauce, the top becoming soft sponge, while the bottom turned into molten butterscotch. The smell filled kitchens with the scent of caramel and butter, rich yet humble. It was the perfect dessert for cold evenings when family gathered close. Mothers made it in glass baking dishes, pouring hot water around the pan like a quiet ritual. The result was a dessert that looked plain, but tasted like magic. It was sweet without being showy, nostalgic even in its time. Kids would scrape their spoons to reach the warm pudding at the bottom, while parents savored the golden crust on top. It was food for togetherness, not meant for perfection, but for warmth. The 1970s made convenience king, yet this dish still demanded patience, and that was its secret charm. A single scoop brought comfort deeper than sugar could explain, a reminder that joy sometimes hides in the simplest of layers. In the fall of 1974, a month after Nixon resigned, a home cook in Hagerstown, Maryland named Christine Hatcher mixed pistachio pudding into white cake batter, covered the whole thing in green frosting hiding nuts underneath, and named it after the scandal. Because of all the nuts in it, she said. White cake mix, pistachio pudding, vegetable oil, club soda, eggs, and coconut flakes baked into a sage green bundt. The frosting was Cool Whip folded with more pistachio pudding, pale and sweet and hiding everything. When Jell-O launched its pistachio pudding mix in 1976, the cake became even easier to assemble. It showed up at every potluck that year, every church supper, every block party, a dessert that let people laugh at something they were still furious about. Today, most people have never heard of it. The cover-up worked. The chocolate mayonnaise cake, a novel yet beloved dessert, makes ingenious use of mayonnaise to replace traditional fat components like butter or oil. This cake's recipe typically combines unsweetened cocoa powder, sugar, and flour with mayonnaise, which adds moisture and richness to the cake without imparting a mayonnaise flavor. First coming into prominence during World War II due to rationing, this cake remained popular into the 1980s for its moist texture and deep chocolate flavor. The preparation involves simple mixing techniques, with mayonnaise added to the wet ingredients before combining with the dry, creating a batter that is notably smooth and easy to work with. Moreover, food manufacturers began to market mayonnaise specifically for its use in cakes during this period, highlighting its ability to create exceptionally moist desserts. Holiday icebox cheesecake was the no-bake miracle every hostess needed. It was cool, creamy, and made days ahead, saving precious oven space for roasts and pies. Cream cheese folded with whipped topping became velvet smooth, poured into crumbly cookie crusts pressed by hand. It was indulgent yet practical, the spirit of 1970s ingenuity. Cooks decorated the top with cherries or mandarin slices, sometimes tinted the filling pink for flair. It lived in the refrigerator until it was time to shine, chilled, firm, and flawless. Every slice was a balance of richness and lightness, of effort hidden behind ease. It became the signature dessert of potlucks and neighborhood gatherings, the one everyone asked for again. The first cool bite after a hearty meal felt like exhale, sweet, airy relief. Icebox cheesecake was more than dessert. It was the taste of modern holiday convenience wrapped in nostalgia. It proved that even without baking, love could still set perfectly. Lemon meringue pie is a classic American dessert consisting of a crisp pastry shell filled with rich lemon custard and topped with a fluffy toasted meringue. The pie's origins can be traced back to the 19th century, but it was in the 1980s that its preparation saw significant refinement. Key to the pie's structure is the stability of the meringue, which in the 1980s benefited greatly from advancements in oven technology that allowed for more precise temperature control, crucial for achieving the perfect meringue. Food science innovations during this time also introduced more reliable cornstarch-based thickeners, which ensured the lemon filling was consistently firm and glossy. Another significant enhancement was the development of more durable and decorative pie dishes that went directly from oven to table, which helped maintain the aesthetic quality of the pie. Toasted marshmallow pie was a celebration of comfort and creativity. Every slice held the warmth of a winter fireplace, its top blanketed with perfectly browned marshmallows that melted into a golden crust. Underneath, a rich layer of chocolate filling waited, silky and sweet. It was a dessert born from campfire memories, reimagined for the suburban kitchen. Housewives of the 1970s loved its easy magic, a few simple ingredients transformed into something spectacular. Children gathered around ovens just to watch the marshmallows puff and brown, laughing when the sugar bubbled over the edge. Each slice felt like a hug, sticky and soft, a reminder that joy did not need to be complicated. This was a pie that belonged on every holiday table, a symbol of togetherness that looked as festive as it tasted. Long before gourmet took hold, toasted marshmallow pie proved that warmth could be baked, shared, and remembered. Today, it remains one of those desserts that never needed to grow up, the flavor of holidays where wonder was still simple. She brought butter, sugar, cocoa, and milk to a rolling boil in a saucepan, watched the clock for 90 seconds exactly, not 80, not 100, and pulled it from the burner. Rolled oats went in, then a spoonful of peanut butter if she had it, then vanilla, and she dropped the mixture by spoonfuls onto waxed paper before it could set. You had 3 minutes before it stiffened. The cookies looked wrong when fresh, loose and shiny, almost wet, but inside 20 minutes they hardened into dense, fudgy rounds. In Midwestern church cookbooks from the 1950s, this recipe appeared as haystacks and preacher cookies. Boil it too long and the sugar made the batch grainy. Too short and they never set. She knew without a clock. Texas sheet cake is renowned for its rich, fudgy icing and moist chocolate base, traditionally baked in a large, flat baking sheet. This cake is particularly noted for its method of pouring warm icing over the hot cake, allowing the icing to partially soak into the top layer of the cake, creating a uniquely moist texture. The traditional recipe uses everyday ingredients like flour, sugar, buttermilk, and cocoa. But the 1980s saw variations that included adding cinnamon or espresso powder to enhance the chocolate flavor. Additionally, the ease of preparation, often just mixing the wet and dry ingredients together, made it accessible for bakers of all skill levels. The cake's popularity was also supported by the widespread availability of high-quality cocoa powders and vanilla extracts, which were becoming more accessible and affordable. Old-fashioned Divinity candy shimmered like snow caught in sunlight. Whipped from egg whites, sugar syrup, and a whisper of vanilla, it demanded precision and patience. The process was an act of faith, beating, stirring, and waiting until the mixture turned cloud-like. In southern kitchens, it was made by grandmothers who knew just when the weather was dry enough for it to set. Divinity was delicate but proud, its texture melting on the tongue like spun sweetness. Each piece was dropped by the spoonful onto wax paper, crowned with a single pecan. It filled candy tins and mason jars, shared between neighbors as tokens of affection. Its white, glossy peaks seemed almost too perfect to eat, yet they were gone in moments. Making it was as much tradition as recipe, a quiet measure of love passed down through generations. Today, few take the time to make Divinity, but for those who remember, one bite recalls Christmas mornings, gentle voices, and sugar that seemed to hold light itself. In February of 1978, Mrs. L.H. Wiggins from Greensboro, North Carolina, submitted a recipe to Southern Living magazine that would become the most requested in the magazine's history. The hummingbird cake started like banana bread, mashed bananas, flour, sugar, cinnamon, baking soda. But then came crushed pineapple and a full cup of chopped pecans, and the batter turned dense and almost tropical. It baked in round layers, dark gold, the pecans giving each slice a crunch against the soft interior. The cream cheese frosting was thick and tangy, smoothed over the layers and crowned with more pecans. It was not a light cake. It was meant for birthdays and homecomings and Sunday afternoons when someone important was coming to the table. Readers in the southern states searched for the recipe for decades after its publication. Most of them were really searching for the kitchen it had come from. Peanut butter haystacks were the definition of 1970s kitchen magic. No baking, no measuring fuss, just pure fun in a bowl. A handful of crunchy chow mein noodles, a spoonful of peanut butter, and melted butterscotch chips came together into golden, tangled clusters. They set on wax paper like tiny sculptures, imperfect yet irresistible. Each bite was salty, sweet, and just the right kind of messy. Haystacks were the dessert you made when company called unexpectedly, or when kids wanted something to help with in the kitchen. They were bite-sized nostalgia, the perfect blend of simplicity and delight. People loved them because they looked homemade but felt inventive, the hallmark of the 1970s sweet tooth. Whether packed in lunchboxes or piled high on Christmas trays, haystacks carried the same message, that joy did not need precision, only warmth. Their crunch was unforgettable, their smell even more so. Peanut butter haystacks may have vanished from modern holidays, but they still live in memory, tangled up with laughter and gold. In the 1970s, Robert Redford was the most attractive man in American cinema, and some home cook decided the most indulgent dessert she could build deserved to be named for him, or to outdo him entirely. The Robert Redford cake, also known as the better-than-sex cake, depending on who was writing the recipe card, was a 4-layer refrigerator dessert assembled cold in a 9x13. Crushed pecans mixed with flour and butter, pressed flat and baked just until golden. Cream cheese beaten with powdered sugar and folded into Cool Whip until it held a firm ridge. Chocolate instant pudding made with cold milk. A final layer of Cool Whip spread perfectly smooth. 3 hours in the refrigerator before it could be cut. It was a staple of church potlucks and neighborhood gatherings from Ohio to the Carolina coast through the late 1970s and into the 1980s. She always brought it to the 4th of July. After she stopped coming to the 4th of July, nobody thought to bring it. The recipe card is somewhere. The exact ratio of cream cheese to Cool Whip is not. Sock It To Me cake, a rich, buttery coffee cake filled with a ribbon of cinnamon, brown sugar, and pecans, became popular in the late 1960s and continued its popularity into the 1980s. This cake is based on a basic yellow cake mix, which is enhanced with sour cream to add moisture and density. The Sock It To Me filling is swirled into the batter, and the cake is typically topped with a simple glaze. In the 1980s, the cake became a favorite for its easy preparation and delicious results, often appearing in brand advertising for cake mixes as a prime example of how home bakers could create bakery-quality cakes at home. The ease of customization by adding different nuts or fruits, or even adapting the sugar mix to include flavors like maple, made it a versatile recipe that home bakers enjoyed experimenting with. Rum raisin ice cream pie was the dessert of quiet indulgence. Vanilla ice cream softened and folded around raisins soaked in dark rum until plump and fragrant. The mixture was poured into a cookie crust and frozen again until smooth as silk. Every slice felt cool, creamy, and just daring enough to feel grown up. The scent of rum filled the kitchen, mingling with laughter and low music from another room. It was the kind of dessert served after the children went to bed, a secret holiday pleasure for adults. Topped with a drizzle of caramel or chocolate, it looked luxurious but came together with ease. Its flavor, sweet, spiced, and a little bold, carried a memory of warmth even when frozen. Rum raisin ice cream pie was the spirit of the decade, a little glamorous, a little rebellious, and completely unforgettable. The name came from the banks of the river, dark, dense, layered like something geological, and whoever made the first one understood that chocolate could be stacked higher than anyone thought reasonable. The Mississippi mud pie that spread through American home kitchens in the 1970s descended from the Deep South mud cake of the 1920s, traced by some food historians to Vicksburg, where a single-layer fudge cake was topped with marshmallow sauce and frosting while still hot, the two layers sinking together into something molten. By the time the Chart House restaurant chain put it on its menu in the 1970s, the recipe had grown into a layered production of brownie base, chocolate custard, whipped cream, and pecans. Home cooks stripped it back to what they could manage: fudge base baked in a 9x13, marshmallows pressed in hot, fudge frosting poured over top. Neither cake nor pie nor pudding, but all three at once. Coconut cream pie is distinguished by its creamy, custard-like filling that blends eggs, sugar, and coconut milk poured into a flaky pastry crust and topped with whipped cream and toasted coconut flakes. The pie's traditional recipe was enhanced in the 1980s with the introduction of high-quality coconut milk, which provided a richer coconut flavor and smoother custard consistency. The pie crust is typically pre-baked, a technique known as blind baking, to prevent it from becoming soggy once the wet filling is added. Innovations during the 1980s included the use of shredded coconut in the crust itself, adding texture and reinforcing the coconut flavor throughout the dessert. Food science played a role in improving the stability of the whipped cream toppings with the development of longer-lasting, stiffer whipped cream formulations, which kept the pies looking fresher for longer periods. Pumpkin cream cheese bars were the sweet smell of autumn baked into a pan. Every layer told a story. The spiced pumpkin batter, warm with cinnamon and nutmeg, swirled through with ribbons of cream cheese that melted into smooth perfection. These bars came from the era of baking mixes, when convenience met creativity, and home cooks discovered that a box of cake mix could still feel homemade. They cooled on countertops while the house filled with the scent of Thanksgiving and nostalgia. The cream cheese added richness to every bite, the pumpkin gave warmth, and the blend felt like the comfort of a sweater you never wanted to take off. They were cut into squares, shared at church gatherings, and tucked into holiday tins with wax paper folded between them. For a generation that valued thrift and taste in equal measure, these bars struck gold. Each piece held just enough spice to make winter feel close, and just enough sweetness to make you stay a little longer at the table. Pumpkin cream cheese bars weren't just a dessert. They were the quiet hum of a decade that knew how to make joy from a baking pan. The poke cake looked like an ordinary white cake until you ran the handle of a wooden spoon straight down through it, punching holes every inch across the top. That was the whole trick, and if you had never seen it done, you would not have guessed. She mixed a packet of strawberry jello with boiling water, let it cool just enough to stay liquid, and poured it slowly over the warm cake, watching it disappear into the holes and fan through the crumb. Jell-O promoted the recipe in the early 1970s, and it spread fast through neighborhood recipe boxes because it required no frosting skill. Just a wooden spoon and patience. The Cool Whip crown went on cold. You could make it the afternoon before a party and forget it until the guests arrived. The first slice always surprised people who had never seen what was hiding inside. Nobody makes it anymore. Nobody turned on the oven. That was the point. Coffee cakes have a rich history, with their origins in European baked goods that were transformed in the American culinary scene into a versatile cake enjoyed alongside coffee. In the 1980s, these cakes often featured a variety of ingredients such as cinnamon, nuts, and fruit fillings, with a crumbly streusel topping as a signature element. The batter typically includes flour, sugar, eggs, and sour cream or buttermilk, which contributes to its moist texture. The innovation of adding sour cream in the batter during the 1980s was particularly notable, as it helped keep the cake moist longer without needing artificial preservatives. Coffee cakes were frequently used as a testing ground for flavor combinations, incorporating ingredients like blueberries or apples, which were particularly abundant in the U.S. during this decade due to agricultural advancements. Here is what you can take from this list into your own kitchen this weekend. The Hillbilly dessert was never really about sugar. It was about attention. Ella May spread apple butter between 6 thin layers because she had 6 layers, and an autumn of apple butter. She used what was in front of her, and she used all of it. A young person watching a grandmother bake in a kitchen that smells of sorghum and cornmeal is receiving something a factory has never made. You do not have to live in a cabin to learn this. You need a pan, a wooden spoon, a Sunday afternoon, and a willingness to let one small thing be beautiful. Try a sorghum cookie. Try a sweet potato pie with what is in your pantry. Bake it for somebody you love. Leave a comment below. What dessert did your own people make from almost nothing? A vinegar pie from a great-grandmother in West Virginia. A coffee soup from an uncle in the Hollow. A piece of hot cornbread with sweet milk over the top. Whatever it was, it still counts. Joy, made out of very little, is a skill the new kitchens can still learn. Pass it on.